Okay, so think about the mafia in the movies. You know, the classic image.
The Godfather, right? Tony Soprano.
Exactly. These powerful figures, feared, maybe even a bit glamorous. Hollywood loves that angle.
For sure. It makes for great drama.
But okay, let me unpack that a bit because today on the deep dive, we're trying to look, well, past those stereotypes.
Yeah, get into the real machinery, you could say. How the mafia actually operates, where it came from, what keeps it going.
Right. Moving beyond the cinematic gloss.
And we've got two really interesting sources to help us do that today.
We do. First up, there's this fascinating Reddit thread. It's all about Al Pacino and Donnie Brasco.
Ah, okay. Interesting choice.
Yeah, because it gives this really unique view on a mafia character that, well, it really pushes back against those typical boss types.
And the second source?
That's an academic paper from Stanford University. It goes way back, looking at the historical roots, the cultural stuff behind the mafia in Italy.
So kind of the micro and the macro view, the individual experience and the big picture origin.
Exactly. That's the plan. Connect these different angles, see if we can pull out some, core truths about this whole phenomenon. It's often so mythologized.
Okay, so starting with Donnie Brasco
Yeah.
and that Reddit thread,
Hmm.
what's the main takeaway there?
Well, what's really striking, and what the Reddit user points out immediately, is the contrast with Pacino's other huge roles.
Right, like Michael Corleone, Tony Montana, these almost larger-than-life criminal mastermind.
Totally. And then you get him and Donnie Brasco, and he's playing someone, well, completely different.
Lefty Ruggiero.
Yeah, Lefty. And the thread really hammers this point. This guy is not the powerful Don. The user, they call him the mob equivalent of a washed-up loser.
Ouch. That's pretty blunt.
It is, but it paints a picture, right? He's older. He keeps getting passed over for promotions. Nobody really respects him. He's always broke.
Always scrambling for cash.
Yeah. I mean, the thread mentions him seeing, hacking a parking meter as a big score. That tells you a lot about his level.
It really does. It grounds it, doesn't it? Takes away that mystique.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key insight here from the Reddit discussion. Even inside this, supposedly organized criminal group, you've got individuals just struggling, desperate, not powerful at all.
Challenges that romanticized view we often get.
Definitely. And the thread connects this to the film itself, Donnie Brasco. It really shows the mafia not as some grand, exciting thing, but as a grim daily grind.
Stripping away the glamour.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is important because popular culture can sometimes make these groups seem, I don't know, alluring.
Right. And Pacino's performance is key to that, according to the Reddit thread.
Yeah, they really focus on how subtle he is, how restrained, especially when you think about his other roles around that time in the 90s, which were often bigger.
More flamboyant, yeah.
Shouting. Right. But here he makes Lefty just this really tragic figure. He puts everything into mentoring Donnie Brasco, Johnny Depp's character.
I see it as his last shot.
Kind of his last chance for meaning, yeah. And of course, we know how that ends. It leads straight to his doom. The user was surprised by Pacino's range then.
Yeah, they mentioned being genuinely surprised. Like, wow, this actor can do this too. It's not just the big operatic stuff.
That portrayal of Lefty is as tragic, not powerful. It's significant. He's not pulling strings.
Not at all. He's more like a pawn.
Yeah, in a game that's much bigger and frankly doesn't really care about him, makes you think about the human cost, even for the people inside these groups.
Good point. And we should remember, Donnie Brasco wasn't just made up. It's based on a real story.
Right. The FBI agent, Joseph Pistone.
Yeah, Pistone. He went undercover using the name Donnie Brasco and infiltrated the Bonanno crime family in New York.
And Lefty Ruggiero was a real person.
A real Bonanno family member. The Alcatraz East website, which has info on the real operation, says he was the one who actually approached Pistone, brought him in as an associate.
And didn't Lefty have a reputation?
Oh, yeah. The website mentions he boasted about carrying out 26 murders for the family.
26? Wow. Okay, so that's the violence right there? Not glamorous at all. Not at all. And the site details how Pistone got in good with him. Apparently, he impressed Lefty with some dive-ins.
Which were actually from the FBI evidence room, right?
Incredibly, yes. And also just by showing he understood the mafia's code, their way of doing things.
It wasn't just chatting, though. The infiltration got pretty serious.
Extremely. The website explains Pistone, he started getting orders from lefties to actually carry out hits. Murder people.
And the FBI had to stage them.
Yeah, they'd stage these elaborate setups, arrest the intended victim beforehand, keep it out of the news, all to protect Pistone's cover.
That's intense. Must have been incredible pressure.
Unbelievable. And then things got even more complicated. The Alcatraz East info says the Bonanno family started fighting amongst themselves. A real internal war.
Right, there's a power struggle going on.
And Lefty, because he saw Donnie Brasco as his guy, his protege, he started pushing for Donnie to become a made man.
Which requires...
Committing a murder. A real one. Specifically, they wanted him to kill another mob figure, Anthony Indelicato.
Okay, so that's where the FBI drew the line.
Exactly. That was the end point. They pulled Pistone out. Operation over.
And the fallout was huge.
Massive. The Alcatraz East site mentions over 100 arrests, convictions. The mafia put a $500,000 contract out on Pistone's life.
And what happened to the guys who brought Pistone in?
Well, Dominic Napolitano, another capo who vouched for Donnie, he was murdered for letting the FBI in.
Brutal. And Lefty.
Ruggiero was arrested. Apparently he was on his way to a meeting where it's pretty likely he was going to be killed too.
So the grim reality hits hard there. Far from the movies.
Absolutely. Really reinforces that Reddit point about the grim daily grind. Even guys higher ups weren't safe. Betrayal, violence. It was constant.
There was also that legal thing mentioned, right? Someone suing over the movie?
Oh yeah, the Screen Rant article mentions that. A guy named Michael Sarasani sued, felt the movie made him look bad through one of the characters.
Yeah, but it didn't go anywhere.
Nope. The judge basically threw it out, citing the guy's own extensive criminal record. Kind of anchors the film even more in that gritty, unglamorous reality.
Right. Okay, so that's the Donnie Brasco angle. The demystification, the look at the lower rungs.
Yeah, a really human, almost bleak perspective sometimes.
So now let's shift to that Stanford paper. How do academics try to explain where this whole thing, the mafia, even comes from? It seems like they take a much wider lens.
They really do. The paper argues basically that you can't understand the mafia without looking deep into Italy's specific history and its culture.
It's not just about crime, then.
Not just crime, it emphasizes the role of beliefs, shared beliefs.
Yeah.
How they were crucial in setting up and keeping the mafia going as, like, an institution.
Beliefs? How so?
Well, the paper suggests that in a place and time with, say, unreliable information and maybe not much central government power.
Like Sicily, historically.
Exactly. Certain beliefs take hold, like a deep suspicion of outsiders, anyone not part of your immediate circle. And if the state isn't protecting you reliably...
A gap opens up, a need for protection from somewhere else.
Precisely. And the mafia kind of grew into that void. Distorted protection, maybe, but it filled a need.
And the paper links this to a specific time period.
Yeah, it looks at Sicily after feudalism ended.
Huh?
It talks about cultural and moral retrograde condition, basically things going backwards culturally. Mercantilism wasn't working out.
And you had a lot of people without jobs.
Right. A lot of unemployed guys who were, frankly, already used to violence from the old system. So the paper paints this picture where force just becomes, well, a normal way to get what you want.
And that shapes how society works.
It influences everything. Social structures, the need for protection networks. It's saying the mafia wasn't just some outside gang that showed up.
It grew out of the conditions.
Yeah, almost like a symptom of that specific societal breakdown. An alternative way of ordering things, providing protection, emerging from within the culture.
That's a really different way of looking at it. And did they mention clientelism?
They did, as sort of an underlying system, exchanging favors, services for political support or loyalty, building these informal power networks outside the official government.
Okay. And the paper also brought in religion, contrasting values.
Yeah, this was fascinating. It contrasts Italian societal values, influenced heavily by Catholicism, focus on salvation after death, talking to God through the church, maybe some trade-offs between your actions and church rules.
Right.
Versus, say, Calvinistic values, where the work ethic itself is seen as a duty, maybe a more direct line to God, individual pursuit of wealth being okay.
And the suggestion is these different belief systems affected how society developed.
The paper suggests they might have influenced the structures, maybe even the acceptance, or at least the tolerance, of an organization like the mafia operating alongside the state.
Wow. So cultural and religious beliefs shaping attitudes toward law, order, even parallel power structures.
Deeply ingrained stuff. And the paper argues really strongly that the mafia wasn't just about social class. It was this autonomous form of violence, but tangled up with Italian values.
Part of the fabric of society back then. Late 1800s, early 1900s.
Yeah, coexisting with the formal laws. It wasn't necessarily trying to overthrow the state, more like operating in the gaps, the
And
weaknesses.
providing that protection?
Exactly. So paying pizzo, the protection money, it actually became, in a way, the logical thing for people and businesses to do.
Because the alternative was worse, and the state couldn't reliably help.
Right. And the belief that there would be consequences if you didn't follow the mafia's rules, that belief itself gave the institution its power. It shaped how everyone behaves.
That's almost self-enforcing then.
That's the idea.
Hmm.
Which also explains why, according to the paper, the official state agents often failed to really tackle the mafia effectively.
They didn't understand the underlying system.
They lacked understanding of the social complexity, the cultural barriers, and eventually, the paper notes, some agents even got corrupted, became part of the system themselves.
So just arresting people isn't enough if the underlying beliefs remain.
That's the core argument. Tackling something this embedded, this culturally ingrained, requires more than just law enforcement. The paper stresses education, social awareness, changing the beliefs.
Seeing the mafia not just as criminals, but as a man-made, non-physical institution born from society itself.
Yeah, it originates within the society, so arrests are needed,
Of
obviously.
course, police action is vital.
But for long-term change, the paper argues you have to shift those fundamental beliefs that let it thrive. It even notes, kind of ironically, how the murders of anti-mafia judges.
Borsellino and Falcone. Tragic.
Horrible tragedies. But the paper suggests those events actually helped turn public opinion against the mafia in a big way, galvanized people.
So even terrible events can sometimes shift those underlying beliefs.
Seems so. And the paper concludes by saying, look, things are changing. Social conditions, cultural shifts, anti-mafia efforts, even European unification, they're all affecting that self-enforcing nature of the mafia.
Okay, so its power isn't maybe what it once was historically.
Potentially weakening in its traditional forms. Which actually brings us to our third source, the Week article. It looks more at the mafia today.
And what's the picture now? Is it gone?
Not at all. The Week says that while maybe La Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian mafia, isn't as dominant as it was, the mob is still very much alive and well.
Different.
Yeah, they've adapted. That's the key word. They've become less flashy, less flamboyant.
Trying to stay under the radar. Avoid law enforcement attention.
Exactly. A big contrast to, say, the Dapper Don era with John Gotti in the 80s. They learned that attracting attention is bad for business.
Makes sense. And the article mentions RICO laws having an impact.
Huge impact. RICO, that's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It let prosecutors go after the whole criminal enterprise, not just single crimes.
Yeah.
That hurt them badly.
And informants, too.
Yes, the use of informants has apparently created a lot of distrust, disloyalty within the ranks. Harder to maintain that old code of silence, omerta.
And we have that document outlining U.S. law enforcement techniques, right? It probably lists those very things.
It does. It talks about electronic surveillance, wiretaps, undercover operations, like Donnie Brasco himself.
Informants, RICO statutes, witness protection.
Financial tools, too, like seizing assets. All these things, the document shows, are part of the toolkit used against organized crime. And the Week suggests they have been effective in disrupting things.
But the mafia isn't gone.
Not gone. The Week is clear on that. And it reminds us that violence is still part of their playbook when needed. So the structure might have changed, they might be quieter.
But the fundamental nature is still there.
Seems so. And that law enforcement techniques document really highlights it's an ongoing battle. These groups evolve, they get more sophisticated, so the techniques have to adapt too.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together then. We started with that Hollywood image, the powerful boss.
Right, the glamorous gangster. But what we've really seen from digging into these sources is, well, it's a lot more complicated.
Definitely more nuanced. You've got the reality of the low-level guys like Lefty Ruggiero.
Yeah, the struggle, the desperation, a world away from Michael Corleone's mansion.
And then you have the deep, deep historical and cultural roots in Italy, explained by the Stanford paper. The role of beliefs, the lack of state power, creating a space for it.
It wasn't just a gang, it was woven into the social fabric in some ways.
Exactly. So understanding the mafia means looking way beyond the shootouts and the fancy suits.
You have to look at the social structures, those underlying beliefs we talked about, and just the harsh realities for the people caught up in it, inside and out.
It really does make you think differently about it.
It does, and maybe it prompts a final thought for you, listening. You know, considering how these deep-seated cultural beliefs could shape and sustain something like the mafia.
Even in a legal organization.
Right. It makes you wonder, What other big societal issues, things that seem really hard to solve, might also be understood better if we look through that lens?
Looking at the collective beliefs underneath, things we assume or take for granted.
Exactly. What other powerful, maybe hidden collective beliefs are shaping the world around us? It's definitely something to mull over, the power of what we all believe together.